Hi guys, welcome back aboard good old Athena here in the BVIs for what might be a little bit of a windy week at anchor. Besides potentially being a bit windy, I think this week might also be a little bit hectic because I need to extend my visa here, so I'll be allowed to stay in the BVIs until Ava gets back. I also desperately need to clean the bottom of the hull. I haven't done that in about 4 weeks. And I want to show you guys the very early steps towards figuring out the hull design for the foam core carbon fiber dinghy I want to build this summer. Beyond those things, I haven't really planned a lot because this week I also start my ABYC electrical certification course, so I want to make sure to leave myself some time for studying.
If you're new here, we're Ava and Mess. I spent 7 years on a somewhat extensive refit of our 1987 Trident Warrior sailboat named Athena. It was an oh glorious sanding extravaganza. We left Denmark and started cruising full time, sailing down Europe's west coast, and then we had our biggest adventure yet, crossing the Atlantic. Now we're sanding and sailing our way around the world.
Back when Athena was up in Denmark in the nice cold water up there, I never had to touch the copper coat. We just didn't get any growth. But here in the Caribbean, where the water is a lot warmer, it seems about 2 to 4 weeks, then we do need to scrub or scrape the hull just as a bit of a preventive measure to not have it get too bad. Looking at the weather forecast, it looks like the wind is supposed to drop this afternoon. And as soon as the wind drops here, it gets awfully warm. And that actually turns something that sounds like a bit of a chore, like scrubbing or scraping the hull, into a pure delight. Because that means you get to spend a bit of time in the water without sweating. I grabbed our blue tankless dive system and of course my trusty and very rusty scraper. This is what the hull looks like after 4 weeks in the BVIs. No real hard growth, but there are some smaller, softer patches. Scraping the hull is easy, especially when you're not holding a camera in one hand. What's on there is not stuck on very well, and the copper coat is very hard, so it's almost impossible to damage the surface. I did find 5 or 6 barnacles. This one is big, so I must have missed it the last time I scraped the hull, but their feet are easy to remove, and then it was just like they were never there. After scraping the hull, I like to go over the hull with one of these scrubby pads. Again, not hard to do, but this whole process is a lot easier with some kind of underwater breathing doohickey, be it with or without a tank. I am really glad we applied copper coat. It's worked out great for us, and it's definitely a product I'll consider for our next boat if we ever find one. But it's also a product I would maybe be nervous about getting professionally applied unless I explicitly trust the actual people doing the work. And also, depending on where you're located in the world, hot or cold, I would be more or less hyper vigilant about the last step in the process, the activation or the actual exposing of the copper in the copper coat. But let's not go down that rabbit hole in this video. Instead, let's lock up the boat, load my trash into the dinghy, and see if we can get to Spanish Town, where 2 out of the 3 immigration officers I've talked to believe I can extend my visa. Mr. Speed Demon continues to impress by being a one-pole wonder, and just like that, I was off, zooming across the water like a bat out of somewhere that's only slightly warmer than the Caribbean. With Mr. Dinghy locked to the dinghy dock, I found a taxi that could take me the 10 kilometers or 6 miles to Spanish Town at a whopping price of $40 each way. At least I'm glad I got to see some more of the island, especially the view coming into Spanish Town. Pretty dang spiffy. After around 20 minutes, we pulled up in front of this yellow building. In there, I had the most pleasant immigration experience I've had this season. I totally understand that it's gotta be kind of sucky to be an immigration officer and have to deal with all those pesky tourists day in and day out. I think both Ava and myself have noticed that the further north we've gone in the Caribbean, the more and more difficult it's been for the immigration officers to hide this. But the 2 ladies at the yellow building, they were so freaking nice. I mean, Just that one experience has restored my faith in humankind. Equally important, I got my visa extension, so I'm now good to stay here in the BVIs for 1 more month. Now I think Ava comes back in about 2.5 weeks, so I won't need the full month, but if jumping in between all the little islands and countries in the Caribbean has taught me anything, it's that you always get the maximum amount, because sailing and plans, they don't really mix. In annoying news, I have managed to crack my one and only crown, leaving a sharpened jagged bit of tooth in there, which is very annoying. But I can't really do anything about it, because tomorrow morning I start my ABYC course, and also with the higher winds forecasted for the rest of the week, picking up a mooring ball, which is going to be my best chance to go to Tortola to the dentist, is not going to be super easy. So yeah, the tooth thing will have to wait until next week. The next morning I plumped down on the settee and got ready to go back to school. The ABYC certification course takes 3 weeks and can be done 100% online. There are 3 online sessions each week during the 3 weeks, and there's also this really awesome study guide that helps a lot with the cramming in of knowledge. Over the course of the next 3 days, I finished the first week of the course. So far, I love it. It's everything I'd hoped it would be. Woohoo! It is Thursday afternoon. That means school is out for the week. I am free again. But seriously, the ABYC course is pretty freaking awesome. It is just what I was hoping it would be. So after the 3 weeks worth of education, there's a multiple choice test, which is 204 questions and a passing score of, I think it's 83%. But yeah, I might do a completely separate video about the whole ABYC certification experience. So if you're curious about that, keep an eye out for that video. Meanwhile, as predicted, the wind has picked up a little bit. Right now we're sitting steady somewhere right around 20-21 knots. According to the Oh Glorious weather forecast here, that should slowly pick up throughout the day, and then we should reach about 23 to 24 knots steady, gusting to 30-31 during the night. Athena is at anchor here in the British Virgin Islands on Virgin Gorda up in Virgin Gorda Sound. More precisely, we're somewhere right about here out in the middle of nowhere. If we switch to the satellite view, yep, you should be able to see that we're sitting right here, and there's a reef out here protecting us, along with a little bit of reef in here. We can see the same thing if we pull up Navionics. Here is the island that's in front of us, and we're sitting right in here, close to these 2 bits of reef. Gusting up into the low 30s is a fair amount of wind, but I have complete faith in our Rockna anchor, and I think we have 1 to 7 scope chain out now, so I think we're very safe where we are. But what about comfort? And just as I was saying that, my behind neighbor here, we're only 3 boats in this little area over here, he weighed anchor to head over to the island. But I don't think the island is going to be the most comfortable place to be for the next 48 hours. And I think, in fact, this place is much better. The wind is going to come out of the northwest, so this direction. So you would think this island is going to be awesome protection. And well, it kind of is. There's not a lot of wind over here, but the wind that is there shifts around a whole bunch. I can kind of maybe illustrate why if we slap a bigger lens on the camera and take a look at our across the bay neighbors. It's not super obvious here, but the boats over there, they tend to point in all different directions because the winds are shifting a lot. There's nothing really wrong with that if everybody is aware of it, because that means when you come into anchor and you're looking at a boat, you can't just automatically assume that the anchor is, say, 20 meters in front of that boat, because that boat could very well be sitting right on top of his own anchor. The last time I went over there when the wind picked up a little bit, over the course of 2 days, I had 2 different boats anchor so close to me that I was very uncomfortable with where they were relative to me. Now, thankfully, after some hours, both of those boats realized that maybe they should move a bit further away. But yeah, that can be a little bit of an uncomfortable situation. Even though I wasn't comfortable with how close those other boats had anchored, and I was nervous about it and kind of muttering a little bit under my breath. I didn't come charging out into the cockpit like some giant maroon, arms are flailing, yelling and screaming. I just quietly monitored the situation, and if they weren't gonna move, then I would have moved. But well, thankfully both boats eventually moved on their own. I had a conversation with one of the guys, super nice guy, and I asked him, so where's your anchor and how much chain do you have out? And he pointed in a direction that was kind of in front of him, and he said 65 meters. I did a quick double take because we're anchored in about 5 meters of water, which means he has a 13:1 scope, which basically means his swing circle allows him to see palm trees and polar bears without re-anchoring. Mind you, at that point in time, we were having a conversation from boat to boat because that was easy. We were only about a boat length apart. So yeah, that could have gone horribly wrong. And I've been thinking a lot about that. I really hope he meant 65 feet, because that would have given him a scope of 1 to 5, which is a lot more reasonable. If you're not familiar with what scope is, here's a nice illustration from Boat US. It is the ratio between the depth of water you're anchored in and the amount of chain you've got out. As I mentioned earlier, I have 7:1 out here. That was mainly because I didn't want to get too close to my behind neighbor. They came in and anchored a few days ago before the wind picked up. I had 5:1 scope out. As the wind picked up, I put out 7:1, but I didn't want to get closer to them. Now that they're gone, well, we can put out as much chain as we want to, basically. Oh, no, wait. It looks like they're coming back. I think maybe there wasn't room over there, or maybe they saw the shifting winds. Long story short, I think because the weather forecast is only predicting gusting 30, it's going to be more comfortable here where the wind is going to be 30 knots gusting, but it's going to be steady. We're not going to be drifting all over the place. And also, over by the island, because the wind is shifting, you end up beamed to the entrance into this area, which has a quite substantial swell coming in through it every once in a while, which gets the boat rolling a lot, which is very uncomfortable. This is the entrance right here, and as soon as there's a northerly component in the swell coming in, well, it gets super rolly over here, whereas, well, you can see it on the chart, basically this is going to be a lot more protected from a northerly swell. I woke up a couple of times throughout the night to poke my head out into the cockpit and to check on our anchor snubber. I had the anchor alarm set on our chart plotters as well as on my phone. I am happy to report we didn't move a single inch. In terms of wind speeds, the forecast was pretty close. We saw winds gusting in the mid-30s and then steady winds around 25 knots. Good morning, guys. This was the windiest night at anchor we've had this season, but at the same time, it was also far from the least comfortable night at anchor. Based on my previous experience over there behind the island, I would say the middle of nowhere spot here is definitely the better option. As you can see, it's pretty nice during some somewhat highish winds, but also during the lighter winds, because there will be more wind out here to get some airflow going through the boat to cool it down. My light weather snubber has held up perfectly. I think from now on we'll use the light weather guy from anything up to mid-20s, 30 knots. Anything higher than that, and I think the heavy duty guy is gonna come into play. While we are on the topic of anchoring, a few weeks back I made this Dyneema bridle for attaching our snubber to the chain, and I used him during the last bit of somewhat high winds. It worked really well, and it was easy to use. Now I can see just the tiniest beginning of chafe on the cover over the Dyneema here. So I would say if you want one of these, either get a better quality cover than the one I was able to find here, or just buy the one from Mantis. In the beginning of the video, I mentioned the upcoming dinghy build. This 3D print represents the first and very early steps in the hull design for that dinghy. I want to design and build something that's inspired by an OC tender, meaning a rigid hull, something super lightweight, something easy planing, and also something that can easily convert into a sailing dinghy. The OC tender is a sexy beast, but unfortunately it is way outside of our price range, and also it's a lot more fun to design and build something rather than just buying it. There's only one teeny tiny challenge, and that's the fact that I am not a boat designer. But I think with a little bit of messing about and trial and error, I should still be able to come up with something that will work well. Having said that, if one of you guys actually have some experience with hull designs or boat designs, and you're willing to spend a bit of time with me on the phone, I would absolutely love to learn more. I have made a list of things that I think will influence the hull design, because what good project doesn't start with a list? First of all, the length overall can't be longer than 3 meters, because then the dinghy won't fit up on Athena's foredeck. We also want to be able to carry a good amount of weight, because this is our car. We do dinghy runs to get groceries and fuel and scuba dive and all that kind of stuff. We want to be able to reuse our existing outboard, so the transom height should fit a short shafted outboard. We want the dinghy to be stable so that it's easy to jump in and out of at the dinghy dock, and also in that vein, we would like the floor or the sole in the dinghy to be almost flat. I'll show you why in just a second. We also want the hull to be able to easily get up on a plane, so that we can hopefully do that with a bit of weight in the dinghy also with our 15 horsepower outboard. We want the hull to be lightweight, so it's easier for us to handle, so no more than, say, 40 kilos. We want to have a permanently mounted rub rail or a flotation pillowy thingy. This is going to be something I will very much be inspired of the OC tender for. And also, lastly, we want to have room for dinghy wheels or beach wheels or whatever they're called. So the transom should have enough room for the outboard and a set of those wheels. Again, let me preface this by saying not a boat designer, but I have some ideas about how those criteria will affect the shape of the hull. First off, we want to be able to carry a lot of load. We're constricted to a length overall of 3 meters, so that means to get the load carrying capacity, the dinghy will have to be a little bit beamy. But that's okay, because I think that beaminess will also give us more stability at the dinghy dock. I believe, and again, I am not a boat designer, but I believe the easiest possible hull shape to get up on a plane is a completely flat bottom, kind of like I think they're called John boats in the US. But that flat bottom also means you'll be very susceptible to slamming, and I think there is maybe also an issue with where the boat won't turn as well or as sharply at high speeds. As a complete layman, I believe that there is a simple solution to those two problems, and that is to add a bit of V-shape to the hull. I believe this is also referred to as dead rise. Here we've got 9 degrees, and I believe that could be a little bit higher, but having that relatively flat hull also means that we can have a flat floor inside of the dinghy without having to add any kind of false floor, meaning more weight. I was lucky enough to see an OC tender up close last fall. Thank you so much, Tim. And if we look at the hull, you can kind of see that the hull shape on those two are kind of similar. The OC tender also has a little bit of that V shape, tiny little bit, but the OC tender also has a giant flat section in the middle of the hull, which, I mean, I'm kind of tempted to do something similar, because that will give us that completely flat floor or sole in the dinghy. Something I would like to do differently than the OC tender is the bow. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit here. As you can see, this is a very relatively pointy bow, and although that looks great, I think a more rounded shape, something like this, would be more practical for us. After having 3D printed my first stab here, I put it in some water, and I noticed immediately that the bow was sitting quite low, so I've tried to correct that here in Fusion. I've made more, for lack of a better word, volume in the hull up forward, so that part shouldn't sink down. But yeah, this is gonna have to be a bit of a trial and error. Don't judge me too harshly, because I've only just gotten good enough at Fusion to actually be able to do this. So yeah, I'm still learning, and also Fusion is not really the best tool for something like this, but it's a tool that allows me to also do a lot of other stuff, so it's well worth learning. I've found something I definitely need to change on this, because for whatever reason the transom height here got away from me. I think to fit the outboard it needs to be 38 centimeters or 15 inches, and this is quite a bit higher than that. Why bother with Fusion, you might ask? Well, first off, this is a one-off build, right? So I won't have a mold for the dinghy that I can lay up my fiberglass and my foam in. I'll have to build, using some frames, build a jig so that I can get the foam secured to that, so I can lay up my outside skin before flipping it over and then laying up the inside skin. And for doing that, I think Fusion is going to be awesome, because once I have the hull design down, I can use Fusion to generate CNC cutting files for those frames, so I can easily assemble the jig and I know it'll be spot on. And of course, it'll also be super easy to share the cutting files and any kind of other documentation to go along with the videos documenting the build, in case somebody out there has a hankering for both a bit of Oh Glorious sanding and a new dinghy. In terms of materials for building the dinghy, I think we'll end up with a 10mm PVC foam core and then hopefully carbon fiber, because that could allow us to knock off somewhere between 8 to 10 kilos of the hull weight. We could also get a stiffer dinghy that way, and of course it would be fancier, and fancy is also important. In terms of cost for building materials, I think we'll end up somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,000 US, meaning it'll be significantly cheaper than a Hypalon dinghy, but at the same time expensive enough that it would be nice to get the hull shape relatively correct the first time around. I know that was a lot of yammering on, but I am really excited about this dinghy building project. I'm excited because it's a bunch of new challenges, and I think this could turn out to be something really cool. If you want more incremental style updates as I'm working on this and see all the little detours and mistakes I make on the way to the final design, I'll be posting those in the Patreon Discord server. So yeah, I really hope this pans out. And on that hopeful note, I will end this week's video here. I think next week I'll still be studying for my ABYC certification, but I have a little project I might be able to squeeze in at the same time, because we have this doohickey from Dometic that was supposed to install on our air conditioning unit that's supposed to remove unwanted boat smells. So yeah, I think we'll get back to that in next week's video. But yeah, I hope to see all of you guys back here aboard Athena next week for a little bit of Oh Glorious DIY fun. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you!